Welcome to the Point. Well, the election is over, as we've pointed out in the past, and there's a lot that will be changing. There's a lot that will stay the same. One of the things that will stay the same is Representative John Fitzgerald will retain your seat. Congratulations, and thanks for being here.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to join you.
You know, you had an interesting race because here you had a former member of the State House running against a current member of the State House. That doesn't happen very often, and it's because of a quirk in the way term limits had changed in the interim. Nonetheless, at the end of the day, you were able to win a second term. Democrats did not hold on to the majority in the House, and I think we knew that that was a possibility going into it, but I don't think anybody would have been able to clearly predict it, because these were close elections. I mean, we're talking about, as you and I sit here and talk, we're talking about some that are in double digits, and we still don't know exactly what's going to happen. But yeah, without getting into all of that, in general, what did it feel like for you and fellow Democrats as you came to the realization of where you were? And I know you've been back with your, with your colleagues since then, and are planning for next year. But what was the general feel for you?
You know, candidly, we really felt like we had a great ticket, top to bottom, that we could make sure that we were helping one another, that we had a democratic environment where we could continue to see success up and down the ballot. Clearly, that did not come to fruition. And you're right, you win some, you lose some. But every race, every single election cycle that we are fighting for control of the House of Representatives here in Michigan, you start from zero. Anything can happen. Anything that can influence a voter in the news or within a campaign comes into play. And so you have to really start from zero. Now, there are some districts that are clearly going to lean heavily one way or the other. But competitive districts like mine, you really have to spend time with the voters, making sure that you're knocking doors. And I'll tell you that the people of the 83rd District were quite saturated, right? You talked about the change of term limits. Well, we also had a change of maps as well, right? We have new districts, and places like Wyoming aren't accustomed to really being the center of the political universe in Kent County, or a sole-focused district like this. And we had 100,000 doors knocked on my campaign alone. And then you have other groups who are continuing to knock doors as well. I bet by the end you could probably tally up 200,000 plus door knocks that took place. Now, never mind everything you see on the internet, everything you see when you turn on the TV. It's a real saturation of the attention of the public. But the biggest part is making sure that you're able to spread your message and really connect with what is being felt in the hearts and minds of voters across the district, across the county, and then the state as well.
I hear so many candidates, particularly State House candidates, who talk about the importance pardon me, of getting out there, knocking on doors, listening to what voters have to say. And I find that interesting because these are not small districts. No. I mean, yours is more compact than some of the rural districts, but nonetheless, as you say, it's a couple 100,000 doors, pardon me, perhaps, that need to be knocked on. But there is one other thing that I also recognize, and I from a candidate standpoint, I'd like to know. My old mailbox, which my neighbors remind me is somewhat in disrepair, every 2 years starts sagging a little more, because even now, in 2024, I get dozens, if not hundreds, of mailers from campaigns of every stripe, for and against, and all of these claims, and they're big and they're bulky. And do those things work?
They do work. Now, of course, you're going to have to tell somebody something multiple times before the information really sinks in, because how many times have you received something? I mean, there's a joke that even there are recycle bins next to the mailbox saying just put political stuff here, because people do get inundated by, not only candidate mail, but issues mail too. And so I think that there really is a benefit to mail, because you have to touch it before you put it in the recycle bin. But it's also a great way to disseminate your information, and to have something that can be referred back to if somebody chooses to put it on the fridge or put it in a file folder that they're going to say, I'll look at that a week before the election and see what the story they were telling is. So I think that there is benefit to that. And I'll tell you, even at the presidential level, we saw that. Heavily Democratic houses, mine included, received mail from Donald Trump. President-elect Donald Trump, he was mailing into a wide swath of voters from basically August to Election Day. And so there is going to be some analysis done on what the effectiveness of mail was in 2024, because clearly somehow it did make a difference.
Yeah, that's interesting to me because it just seems like with all the other technology, but in my mind, I'm like, it's got to work or they're not spending this kind of money on it. One of the other questions I have, and we're going to talk about issues. There are a lot of important things that have to happen. But one of the other things that I wonder is what kind of analysis will be done and what, if any, have you already done about the way we vote? Because this will be the first general presidential election where we will have had at least 9 days for us. Others had more, and I think that needs to be examined, but that's another show. But we had 9 days of in-person early voting, no reason absentee voting, which means that 45 days before the election, some people were already making their minds up, when a lot of times we think it closes in the last 4 or 5 days. And even that happened too, because we know that, you know, the numbers said one thing, but when it was all said and done, something changed. How does that impact the vote? Or does it really impact the way you have to campaign differently, maybe more than the outcome?
Well, it does change how you campaign, right? At the end of September, we had absentee ballots out in people's hands. And that meant by October 1st, you could have had your ballot cast, and the next 30-plus days of information and fluidity of the campaign doesn't impact that voter. So making sure that you have good data about who is voting, you know, how they're voting, and what we're going to do is, dissect what happened with absentee voting, what happened with early voting. I mean, the Secretary of State had a great map and was kind of diagnostically showing us, look at these trends of people who are in early vote lines. And in Wyoming, where we had one site, people were waiting 2 hours or more to early vote. Now, if they had gone on Election Day, I think that probably would have been a 20 to 30-minute experience. But they were willing to stand there for 2 hours to early vote. And so clerks are also going to now take that into consideration for the next election to say, well, do we move from one site to 2 sites for early voting? Do we go from 2 to 3? Because there is clearly a prevalence and an opportunity that your schedule can be a little less tight on Election Day, and you have that opportunity to cast your ballot when you are assured of who you are voting for.
You know, it's interesting. I go to a rural township to vote, and I went on Sunday afternoon, last day of in-person voting. I expected this to be a 4-minute exchange, go in and, you know, make the shotgun pattern, and away I go. It only took about 25 minutes, but I've never waited 25 minutes. There were a lot of people voting. So, I mean, this surely has changed the paradigm for voters.
Well, and we saw that everywhere, rural, urban, suburban. It was not actually siloed by demography, that somebody was only looking at early voting or absentee voting as their option. It was across ideology, it was across party, that was something that people wanted to utilize. And again, the data that we're going to be able to look into will tell us a better story of that in the weeks and months to come.
One of the things that we know is that these were close elections for the State House. We know the same thing was true 2 years ago when Republicans lost by collectively, I think 2 of those seats by 700 collectively, so 700 votes out of the millions cast. So we know that a lot of these districts are pretty close and they're pretty changeable. And we also know that there's a big election just 2 years away. We'll talk about that in a minute. But in the meantime, we have divided government, and we're used to that. We've seen that before in the state. So how do you approach that? And you're in that unique class. You came in as a freshman. You were in the majority. There had been Democrats that had been serving in that chamber for a long time that ever held a gavel. Now, the gavel shifts. But you still have relevance, and you still have things you want to get done. We're going to talk about the second part in the second half of the show, but in the interim, how do you reorganize the thought process now knowing that you're not going to set the agenda, you're not going to set the schedule, you're not necessarily going to know what votes are coming up, just like Republicans didn't for the last 2 years?
Well, let me just say, you're not wrong about looking at, we had a very large freshman class in both caucuses in 2022. Now, with 52 Democrats who will be serving in the 103rd legislature beginning in January, 32 of those 52, I believe, will be first-time minority members. But it's a similar feel on the Republican side, that about that many, I believe, on the Republican side will be first-time majority members. And so looking at this is that we are at the first stage of these new term limits where power will continue to shift and flow over the next 10 years, but all of a sudden you're going to have people who have been there for 3 terms, 4 terms, 5 terms, 6 terms, and serving for up to 12 years now in the House of Representatives. So that institutional knowledge will continue on. The feeling of minority versus majority is going to linger, and I think inspire a lot of effort to win back that chamber. Now, because we are not going to be in charge of the agenda come January, we are looking at lame duck as an opportunity to move some of those priorities forward. But my record continues to show I'm willing to work across the aisle. I want to continue to work on issues that bring people together and put Michiganders really and their health, safety, well-being at the center of that policy.
I don't want to get too deeply into lame duck because anything can happen. And in the past, anything has happened. But I do ask this question just as my own musing. You have the Senate that has a bunch of Democrats who are going to run for re-election or something else. You have a governor who has 2 years left in office. If she has future political plans, these next 2 years will be pivotal in setting her resume, if you will, for how she works in divided government, for example. Is that going to have any impact on what lame duck looks like in the House? Is there going to be an effort on either one of those two entities to restrain some people in the House who might otherwise, as they go out the door, they want to finish their business, they want to get those things done? Does that play into it, or is it just the Wild West?
I'll say this, everything factors, but at the end of the day, you need 56 votes in the House, you need 20 votes in the Senate, and you need 1 signature from the governor for something to become law. And so it's about consensus building. It is not about acting as an island. You need to build coalitions, gather support, and still continue to move that forward. Now, future aspirations. Whatever office may come for any House member, Senate member, or a governor, that I think will always have something in the back of voters' minds and those who are looking at us in inquiring about what we're going to do. But I will tell you that putting Michiganders first and foremost in this policy and in this lame duck is going to be my #1 priority and others.
Let's find out what those priorities are going to be after lame duck when you come back in January. We will continue that conversation and talk about what does the new House look like and what would Representative Fitzgerald like to get done next. To the Point. Welcome back to the Point. We're talking about the aftermath of the election, but more important, we're talking about what's going to happen in Lansing in 2025. We won't get to 2026 yet, but let's talk about 2025. Representative John Fitzgerald is with us. And I start again by congratulating you on being reelected. Now, this is new territory for you. And as you point out, it's new territory for a whole bunch of your colleagues and on the other side of the aisle. And it's a matter of building consensus. Not that it wasn't for your first 2 years, because within your caucus, to get to 56, was a pretty delicate balancing act on some days. Some days maybe not quite as hard. But so you know how this is done. But now you have to reach a consensus with people who may be a little bit further out of the thought process than you may be. Nonetheless, it's been done before. So how do you approach that?
Well, let me just say, don't think that this was unique to the Democrats, because we're going to see a Republican majority that even in the past 2 years, we have seen bills pass 105-5, 107-3, 109-1. And thinking of a 58-52 majority for the Republicans, they're still 3 votes away from having a problem with their own members getting things across the finish line. And that's going to be up to their Speaker-elect Hall, to bring their 58 members together to ensure that their priorities can get over the finish line and over to a Democratic Senate. But truly, I think that this is going to be about consensus building, because we are in divided government, that unless somebody wants to have a government shutdown, then we're going to have to see people come together to really fix the issues and address the issues that people are feeling at their dinner tables, in their pocketbooks, and otherwise. So I don't think this is unique to the Democratic caucus. We are going to now have to really build on, I think, the framework and the groundwork that we have laid. I understand that people want to paint this as a us versus them, red versus blue, and in some ways a zero-sum game. but it's not about getting everything that you want. It's about building something that can be sustainable, that is good for the people of Michigan, and that is eventually good for, again, health, safety, well-being, our economy, and otherwise. We can continue to build consensus there, work with Speaker-elect Hall. I will be serving as Democratic floor leader in this coming term, and so in a leadership post there, I will be tasked with helping to build that consensus, which, again, my record shows I'm always open to.
You point out it's not about getting everything that you want, and I appreciate you saying that, but let's take a look back over the last 2 years. I mean, you talk about some of the big things that were talked about during the campaign, some of the things Democrats had promised for 40 years that were delivered in the last 2 years. Many of those had no Republican support. So when you talk about the big stuff, that's not where you're getting 107 votes.
Well, let's be clear. Partisan votes are still going to occur. You still have a party that you are working within. You have colleagues that you are closest with. You're right, party line votes will occur. But there is an ability to have, 60 and 50 or 70 and 40 come together and support a bill, because those bills that I talked about that I've passed were not always 110 to 0. I think I had one, but just one. I'd have to look back. But at the end of the day, you are talking about trying to gather 5, 10, 15 people at a time from the other side of the aisle to come with you and really look at the policy and think about what the impact is for their constituents and what we can accomplish together.
Let's talk about a budget. You raised the specter. You just said it could happen if you want a government shutdown. We've been there before. We have stopped the clock in the House. I remember standing in the chamber for like 70 hours waiting for people to try to come to a consensus. We've seen some gimmickry. We've seen the constitutional time limit extended by 30 days. I'd still like to see a constitutional scholar explain that to me, but that's all water under the bridge. We know when budgets don't get met, it creates a big problem. It might not be as big a problem sometimes as politicians try to make it sound, because even with a partial few-hour government shutdown, there were not a lot of major impacts. So with that all said, it's disruptive. It's disruptive for the taxpayers. It's disruptive for the bodies. So how important is it going to be to get together on a budget? Because that's the first thing you're going to have to work on.
Yeah, we have to come together on a budget. No, I certainly do not want a government shutdown. And that has been floated and asked of the new leadership in Lansing that will begin in 2025 about whether or not that's something that they see in the cards. There's really a non-answer occurring. I think that we do have to come together. A budget should always be a reflection of the priorities of Michiganders. But to think that, it's unharmful, I don't think this is the correct way to look at this. We have housing support, food support, transportation budgets, and education budgets that people have to build their lives around. Whether or not their child is going to be equipped in school come the fall, and schools are preparing to get their budgets in place. That's dependent upon us passing a budget on time that is balanced, and that is going to be, yes, one of the top things that we must do in this new divided government beginning in January.
Yeah, my point that I was making is that when we have seen this happen in the past, those things have not been impacted on the whole. Were they late? Yes, they were late getting passed. But then until this new law that was put into effect a few years ago to have budgets done by July 1st, they were routinely not done until the end of September, even though school budgets start July 1st. That's always been an inequity that the legislature tried to fix. But that July 1st date has been missed as often as it has been hit since it put in there. So I'm not saying it doesn't matter.
Well, we hit it twice. Yeah. We hit it twice, and I'm excited to see if we can continue that tradition of hitting the mark for the next 2 years.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to see. You've got things you want to get done. Tell me what it is that you're going to try to build consensus for when January rolls around.
Well, I think, as a young father myself and with talking to constituents, childcare has to be an issue that continues to be at the forefront of not only my mind, but the legislature's mind. Thinking about the cost and the accessibility of childcare and what that does to working families, is going to be, I think, a primary issue. We have proposals in Lansing that are continuing to be discussed and shaped, but it's not only about cost, it's also about that accessibility factor. It has to do with who is providing that child care and making sure that private operators and those who are maybe public operators, like a school district, are able to make sure that our children have a safe and effective place for them to grow and learn. But the cost, of course, that's directly related to what you're able to do, if you're able to work, how many hours you're able to work. I think that has to be something that we work on as a chamber, because that goes well beyond the party line and the political scheme of everything.
What do you do with that? I mean, because I've had friends, and we've seen, we were fortunate in that we could work schedules and it didn't become a burden, but I've seen couples have to make that decision about if one of the husband or the wife don't work, because by the time you pay child care, you're working for virtually free.
Yeah.
So they stay home, and that makes a big impact on their lifetime earnings and their ability to provide for their families.
Their retirement savings,
Yeah,
what they're
right.
able to put away for college or continuing education for their child. You're exactly right. When we think about the economics of this, we really have to think about when families are pregnant, they're expecting a child. They go to a child care center and they say, do you have space for a newborn on December 1st? Well, we don't. It's actually an 8-month wait list. Then you have to think, what happens after family leave, if you have family leave? What happens in that gap period if that's the only place that you can afford the monthly payment for? All of this has to come into consideration, and that's where, again, accessibility and also ensuring that those who are working in our child care centers are paid commensurate with the importance of their job. It is something that I would not myself be able to do day in and day out for all those hours. And so many people step up to the plate to care for our children while we continue to work and try and make ends meet at the house. And so that is something that does have to be at the forefront of the conversation.
And so you'll find the consensus. There'll be a lot of people that say, yeah, that's a great idea. How are you going to pay for it? Come back when you get that part of it put together. What else you got on your agenda?
Well, I think that, again, when we look at the welfare of our children, I have a package about sextortion, ensuring that children and teens are not being taken advantage of online. We have cases in Michigan, like the case of Jordan DeMay, the tragic case of Jordan DeMay from Marquette, who his life was tragically ended early by suicide after being extorted online. Our children are gaining access to a world beyond what we could really comprehend, even as young people ourselves, that the opportunity for online predators to extort our children and then potentially cause bodily harm or death even is really challenging. And so we have a bill set that's in right now. I hope that we can get it done before next session, but if we don't, I'm going to continue to carry that mantle and make sure that we're protecting our children online and providing education to say it's okay to ask for help if you find yourself in this situation. We want to make sure that you, of course, are safest in this situation.
Got about 30 seconds left. What is your hope for the makeup of the new legislature? We know what it's going to look like essentially for the next 2 years. You got Republicans with a somewhat narrow margin in the House, very narrow margin in the Senate, a governor for 2 more years. In 30 seconds, what's your hope?
I want us to be productive. I want us to be responsive, and I want us to really find, again, those consensus building areas that, if nothing else, we can be pragmatic for the people of Michigan. That is my hope for this coming term, and I'll look to be a part of that solution. I
appreciate you coming on, and I also wish you luck on some of those initiatives, because I think that they are important. I hope you'll come back and talk to us, because not only are they important to talk about, but it's not just trying to do something, but it's implementing something that works. And I want to talk more particularly about the 2 issues we just talked about. Thanks very much for your time. When we come back, a final thought as we move into a new year. What's it going to look like? Next, To the Point. Well, when the legislature comes back in Lansing in January, Republicans will have a narrow margin in the House, and Democrats will still control the Senate. We'll see what that cooperation looks like. See you next week. To the Point.